can I begin with just a little reminder of the code of conduct? We've had the code of conduct up on the screen, but just a little few points to help us through the session. Firstly, if you've got a question, can you click on the Q&A box rather than the chat box, and then we can handle things through there and obviously make sure we answer as many questions as possible. And if we can't get to your question in the time, then we'll try and get back to it over the course of through the afternoon or over the course of early part of next week. Also, just a reminder that not to share any sensitive commercial data, not to make any reference to pricing, how you price or promote your products, and just avoid those topics through the course of the webinar. Right, we are talking today about the fact that we can open our stores from the 15th of June. Non-essential retail is allowed to open from that date. And what we thought we would do is get together a panel of people who can help with questions with regard to topics you might have or questions you might have about plans and prep you need to put in place before the 15th of June. So what we've assembled is we've assembled a panel of Nicky from, I'll go around individually, I'll announce the group and then go around individually. Nicky, who's Managing Director of the HR Point. So we've got Nicky who can help us out with all HR issues with regard to staff coming back to work and any issues you might have in those first few weeks. We have Ian Kendall, who's a health and safety specialist at Crona, and he can help us interpret the government guidelines as they are. And the general guidelines, and hopefully find a way of applying that to what we do in MI. And then we've got Jamie Clayton, who's sales director at Absolute Music, and we have Simon Pollard, who's the managing director of Miller's Music, and we're going to talk to those two about the differences between their two stores and how they're preparing to open up and when they're preparing to open up. Before we start, just for those who don't know me, my name's Anthony Short. I'm president of the MIA. And my experience, I didn't mention last time we did one of these, what I'd done in the past, but I've experience on both sides of the fence with regard to MI. So I worked for a chain retailer in the sector for a number of years and did shop floor roles and also behind the scene roles in purchasing. And then I worked for Shure Microphones for many years, and so was on the distribution side of the equation. So I've got experience of both sides of the particular industry. So I'll start by just asking the panel if they could quickly introduce themselves and give you a little bit more background. Nicky, you are the top of my screen. I don't know where you are on everybody else's, but you're the top of my screen. So could I just ask you to go first?
Yeah, of course you can. So thank you, first of all, for asking me to be part of this. For those of you that don't know me, Nicky from the HR Point. So I've worked with the MIA for many years and advised quite a few of your members. And I know over this period of lockdown and help with furlough leave, because I've given help to a lot more of your members as well in helping with furlough agreements and questions. So yeah, I've learned quite a lot about furlough. When you all heard about it, it's when I first heard about it as well. And obviously now here to help you navigate getting staff back to work, how to manage that, how to deal with that, and any kind of consequences on your business that you may need to deal with staff on.
Thanks, Nicky. That's great. Just a reminder to everybody, we've been making some of your time available, haven't we? We've been the MIA bought up a whole chunk of Nicky's. We bought you for a while, didn't we? Basically, you know. So we've been making Nicky's time available to MIA members. If you've not used that and you feel you'd like to spend some time with Nicky, then we have a scheme in place that allows you to have an hour with Nicky, and we cover the cost of that. So please contact Alice in the office or contact any of us. And we can make that happen if there's anything that, you think you'd find that helpful for. Ian, if I could ask you to jump in next, and thank you very much for attending. Ian's new to this bunch, so a warm welcome to Ian. And if I could just ask you to give us a bit of background.
Yeah, fine. I'm a health and safety consultant at Crona. I've been with them for over 2 years, but my consultancy background goes back about 15 years. Prior to that, I was actually a store manager for W.H. Smith's, 20 years retail experience. So I was involved a lot of health and safety work within the retail business in regards to opening, closing, refitting, replanning stores. So it's quite interesting that it's sort of come a bit around 360. So that actually, working out with get a lot of queries that are coming in currently on the moment, because although I'm field based, we're just basically helpline. So we get a lot of calls in regards to different businesses trying to reopen, but reopen safely. Just to let you know, MIA members have access through to our advice lines as well.
Thanks, Ian. Jamie, welcome back, because you did our last one as well.
Yes.
And you're from Absolute Music down on the South Coast. Do you want to give a bit of a background on yourself?
Yeah, I've been at Absolute Music since October last year. Previous to that, I was at a role at Federal Music for 16 years. So been retail, purchasing for that period of time. During the lockdown, I was 6 weeks back in Birmingham, because my life's split between Birmingham and Bournemouth at the moment. So I was 6 weeks back in Birmingham, and then the past 3 weeks I've been back down in Bournemouth, majorly kind of planning for the opening of the store as and when that happens.
Cool. And last, but by no means least, Simon Pollard, Managing Director of Miller's Music. How are you, Simon?
Yeah, good, thank you, Anthony.
Do you want to take everybody through your... don't take them through all of your CV, because we'll be here all afternoon, but do you want to take them through the highlight of the Millers?
Yeah, okay, so we, our group consists of 3 retail stores, 2 in music, in what I'd class as being traditional music, general retail. So we've got a store in Cambridge, Miller's Music, that's an old heritage retailer, 1856. It was formed with mainly a piano focus, also orchestral instruments, a big sheet music selection, and we had, up until a couple of weeks ago, a guitar department, and I'll come to that later if any of the questions are relevant to that. We've got a piano-focused business in Norwich as well, and then, just as an aside, we also own an outdoor clothing business around the corner from our music business as well.
That actually might be relevant, because the thought process into the two worlds might actually be handy through the course of the afternoon. But right, well, we'll see how we go. So as a reminder, if you've got a question, click on the Q&A button. We'll go through a few questions that we've had already. Obviously, this is a sort of a question time style event, so we kind of need your interaction as well. So please feel free to drop us a question if you've got one, and we'll try and pick up on as many of those through the course of the session. We're going to start almost right at the beginning with, and this is a question for Jamie and Simon. Obviously, you can open from the 15th of June. What we don't know at this point in time is whether there will be a desire, an appetite for consumers actually to start visiting stores again from the 15th of June that are non-essential. So I wondered if either of the two of you had got any advice, or you'd be doing anything in terms of actually sort of preparing and attracting customers back.
Yeah, I mean, we've remained open from the online side of things since the lockdown started. So for us, it's the feeling and the phone calls that we get in from customers that we know that the customers that locally want to come back into the store. I've had plenty of phone calls, engaging with them on the phone. 10 to 15 calls a day, I'd say, at the moment we get in. Are you open? When can I come back into store? So just from that alone, we know that the local area customers definitely want to come back and engage in the store. Whether customers want to travel further afield, we haven't really took many calls on that right now. But definitely the local customers that we have want to come back into the store. To qualify a little bit more, we are going to send out a mail shot the start of the week, just kind of giving customers an indication of what we're planning to do, and see what the response to that is, to see if it, just to tick all the boxes. But as far as we're concerned, from the volume of calls that we get in, that's enough for us to kind of warrant opening on the 15th.
Okay, so that's a positive start. Are you planning to be open on the 15th then? Is that your...
Yeah, we're planning to be open on the 15th. We've got different ways that we're going to do that. It's not as straightforward as reopening the doors, but I think we're going to come to that a little bit later. But yeah, we're definitely going to plan on being open on the 15th.
Cool. I'll get to you next on the same question, but as I did in the last webinar, shout out to Betty Hayward from NAM, who's just joined, because she always says hello and announces her presence. Nice to have you here, Betty. Simon, similar thing for you. Have you put any thoughts into, what you're expecting is the reaction when you do open your doors again?
Yeah, we've actually got a list of customers who want to come into the store, either to drop off repairs, want to come in and book a demonstration. We've got about 70 customers on a list at the moment. So we've got an assessment of some level of demand. We're not actually planning to open on the 15th. That's not our current intention. We've used this period, and anyone who's in retail who's refitted shops always has the nightmare of trying to figure out how to refit your store and what to do and how to minimize the disruption. Well, we've actually used it as an opportunity to refit the store. So we're planning to open from the 26th officially. What we're doing is we're implementing a booking system, which we trialed pre-lockdown. We were already running it pre-lockdown. And we're going to be allowing access to that system from the 15th, but we'll be opening very, very limited. So we'll be literally opening for a customer for a demonstration on say, piano instruments, but it's going to be a very, very limited basis that we're going to open. I think we're going to come, as Jamie has said, we're going to come to some of that later on areas that we're going to concentrate on and areas where we're going to be making significant changes to the business. But yeah, 26th, just as an aside, I walked around Cambridge just to assess where the rest of retail was at, and looking at clothing retail in particular, there are swathes of the high street that have completely removed all stock from their stores. I walked around a number of multiples that are empty. Monsoon was completely empty, Jack Wills was completely empty, Hugo Boss was completely empty, Jigsaw was completely empty. So I think high street retail generally, these were all fashion-based clothing businesses, but they've actually emptied their stores. So we're waiting to see when the high street they start topping up that stock, and it will no doubt because they've got spring and summer collections. But we believe that we've got a little bit of time and we can assess, but we're definitely looking at later on this month.
Yeah, well, that's an that's an interesting point, because although 15th is out there as a date that you can open, I think one of the things that certainly, you know, I would be thinking would be that that's not the date you have to open. I think ultimately it's going to be down to every store to, you know, to make a decision about what is right for them, what is right for their staff, and what is right for their customers. So, you know, Jamie, you said you're working towards the 15th. Simon, you said you're working towards a slightly later date, but you're going to open some of your facilities in terms of booking, or target that for the 15th. And I think it's interesting that you've both taken a slightly different approach there. One of the things I'm keen to talk about is, I guess, what you could do, and apologies to Ian and Nicky, because we will get to your areas of expertise in a minute, but I'm just trying to do a little bit of pre-work with regard to the retail guys. One of the things that I was keen to talk about was what could be done, I guess, before you actually get people arriving down to the building. Because I know from my own experiences, when I've been to stores through this period where I've felt like there's been some preparation, I've been aware of what I was expecting when I got there. Often I've felt more comfortable in those scenarios where actually, you know, before I've even got near the store, I've been instructed to clean my hands. I've been instructed to, say, clean a shopping trolley. I've been reassured about the number of people in the building and how they're maintaining their social distancing. So I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about what your plans were for almost informing your customers about what to expect before they actually get to the building.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to do a newsletter on Monday just to kind of touch base with customers and say, look, we're planning to open on the 15th, but then later on the week, we are going to issue our COVID-19 policy for the customers to actually let them know what we're doing from a staff point of view and also from a customer point of view, and how their journey around our store has changed over the past 12 weeks now, because it's a much different store from when we left it. And similar to Simon, we've used this time to relay things out, have a bit of shop fitting done, and also make sure that there is social distancing measures in place throughout the whole store for customers to walk around. Our attitude is we've got all of this space, so let the customers walk around as if it's a museum for instruments, and then get to our service counters where we've created a big open space for them to queue, airport style queuing system, and then get to the point of service, which obviously we've got screens, we've got hand sanitizers. So that's our thought process in getting there, but we want to obviously allow customers to know that before they get into the store. The other thing we're going to do is just do a simple walkthrough video from the front doors, what your journey is going to be like when you come back into the store from that front door through to the counter to the upstairs guitar department, where I'm sat in now, which was the drum department, which is now a piano department.
I'm almost reminded of that bit, you know, when you go in an airport and you're queuing up for security, and there's normally somebody at the end shouting instructions that you can't hear. And yet then you'll go to another airport where actually you walk along and everything's very clear about, you know, take your belt off, take your shoes off, put all your stuff in the tray. And the difference between those two things, that when somebody does that well, it becomes very easy to understand what your role is in that whole process. And then when it's done really badly, which is normally one person who's been screaming the same thing for 6 hours, continually screaming the same thing, then you don't tend to really understand what you're supposed to do. So I guess I'm very keen on how well we can promote that before we start. And that wasn't a question, was it? Which is why you're nodding. I probably should answer. In my position, I should probably answer questions. Simon, what are you planning on doing before, in terms of that kind of prep for customers coming down? Because obviously what you've said is you've had a lot of engagement with customers already.
We've got lots of engagement. We've had people inquiring, can I come in and try trumpet mouthpieces yesterday? We've got people expecting to walk into the store at the moment, which I still find slightly incredulous that the customers haven't quite got that message as yet. What we're focused on, and this will lead on slightly to the health and safety side and the areas with Ian and Nicky. At the moment, we're completing risk assessments and method statements for the various parts of our business. So not only do we have the retail stores, but we've got service technicians as well that travel to customers' homes. So we're currently completing risk assessments and method statements for those. As far as what are we completing in advance, our approach has not been to form one-way systems in the store. Instead, we're simply going to limit the store on a booking system. We're going to make sure that we clearly set the expectation for the customers in advance. So the emails that are sent out to the customers explain to them that when they come in, there'll be hand sanitizing stations, that our teams have been trained or retrained to ensure that they're distancing themselves from customers. I think the government advice, and I know that has shifted in the last day or so with regard to wearing of masks as well, but we're looking at the options on that. We don't necessarily feel that putting people in masks is the right approach in our showrooms, but we're going to offer customers that option so that they feel safe and secure should they want our teams to wear masks whilst they're doing the demonstrations. But it's all about setting the expectation with those customers so that they understand that the store will be theirs at that point, that they will be guided around by one of our team who's been trained to demonstrate those instruments in a socially distant way. We're also starting to prepare video content for a number of the areas which are slightly more challenging to demonstrate, that I think we're going to come to slightly later because there's a couple of questions that have come up, like the wind areas. There are certain product areas, and I read about Waterstones and their plan with regard to segregating stock. After you've picked up a book, they're going to ask you to put it on a trolley and segregate it for 72 hours. At this stage, our business isn't relying on that area, that sheet music. So we're actually planning to remove that from the shop floor completely. And if a customer wants an item, then we're going to go and pick that for them at that point and then operate a kind of click and collect service.
Ian, just a nice point to bring you in, actually. Something Simon's just touched on there, which is risk assessment and method statements. What is the general guidance on what you should be doing prior to opening your doors?
Well, the general risk assessment process is looking at all aspects of how you manage the risk within your business. So with COVID, it relates back to the general guidance that's been coming out. So we've all touched on it before in the fact that the social distancing and how that's going to be done. It's how we manage the customers and that, like I say, their expectations. So it can be information in regards to making sure that if customers are shown a poster or details of if you're showing any symptoms or you don't feel well, then unfortunately that you're not going to be able to, come into your premises. And it's just going through that process. And the other bit I'd like to touch on with the risk assessments, it's not only the risk assessments for your business and your customers, but also thinking about the risk assessments that you do for your individual employees. Mm-hmm. So it could be the fact that they've not been at work for a period of time. And it's basically then just acknowledging and capturing the information in regards to, have they been exposed to COVID, either not themselves, but within the family home, or have they got any underlying health issues before they come back to work? Because then as an employer, then it may be the fact that we need to sort of, have those expectations and sort of put extra things in place for that particular person. So they're the type of things that you're looking at. The risk assessment process can be as long or as short as you see fit, because it's being reasonably practical about what things you can put in place. And like Simon and Jamie have already, they've touched on quite a few of the things that not stole my thunder, but they've actually talked about the things that are practical about putting into the businesses. So whether it is a case of, if it's suitable for your business about managing customers, then you restrict numbers, make it an appointment process, but that forms all part of your individual risk assessment and your thought process. And then just making sure that we actually share that with the employees, so they've got the buy-in of what processes that we need to do. So some of the things, especially if you've been if your business has been closed for a long time, part of that initial risk assessment is how we maintain the hygiene and cleanliness within the building. And both of you mentioned about having refits, so that gives you the natural opportunity, doing a refit, and you're always going to be cleaning up after yourselves and things like that. Part of that risk assessment is also what Simon mentioned about having the barriers in place, what Jamie's mentioned about how we queue, get people to queue, and how we navigate people around the store, and then also exiting the store. So it depends on the size of your business and the size of the actual premises on what practical things that you can actually do. The thing that's always been mentioned is the key thing is about the hand hygiene as well, in the fact that for employees, it's a case of when they leave home, they wash their hands before they leave home. When they arrive at work, the first thing they do is they should be washing their hands. So in between that journey, any commuting they've done on public transport or any sort of contact they've had with anything outside, basically what they're doing is when they arrive at work, they're able to remove any contamination if there is anything. So then that workplace remains hygienic and clean. So there's some of the tips that you've got. The hand sanitizer thing it's an alternative to soap and water, but because your customers haven't got access to your own welfare facilities, it's an option to have that in place and ready for them.
Thanks, Ian. On that point of employees, obviously you just talked about, I guess, doing whatever you can to ensure that anybody coming back into the business isn't bringing anything in with them, so they're not imparting a risk on the business. I suppose the other half of that question for you, Nicky, is how do you reassure employees who might be the other way, who might be thinking, well, I've been at home for 8 weeks, I'm fine. Am I now putting myself in a risk scenario?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually getting people back to work and dealing with that confidence to come back to work is quite a big thing. Is, you've been off work since March, suddenly go back to work. Well, some people are desperate to get me back to work. I want to work, it's fine. Others are very nervous and hesitant. So I think it's very much about having individual conversations with people about what you're planning to do, what you've put in place, what your risk assessment has uncovered, what other facilities have you got for them. So Simon mentioned masks. Would they feel safer in a mask? Hand washing, yeah, absolutely. Wearing gloves, some people think it's a good thing, some people think it's a bad thing. But what have you got available for them should they feel it's going to help them? We've got a lot more used to seeing social distancing, face mask, people wearing gloves. So I think that kind of thing, people are a little bit more used to it, but there is still that concern. So I think it's like Jamie said about having screens up, a queuing system. So it's about reassuring your staff that this is what we've got in place, this keeps you safe. But talking to them about why have they got those concerns? So is it that they're worried about taking something home to someone in their family? Have they got any underlying medical conditions that you need to be aware of? And all of those side of things as well, to really kind of, I think if you have open, honest conversations with people, it really helps. Ultimately, business isn't going to be what it was. When Jamie opens on the 15th, business isn't going to be as busy as it was pre-lockdown. So you might not need all of your staff in. So if you've understood all of their circumstances, you can adapt who you've got in to fit with them, their needs, their concerns, rather than all come back to work, not sure what you're worried about. I've got a client that runs a nursery, and they had a member of staff who'd been off for several weeks who was very worried about coming back. They gave them the reassurance, this is what we've put in place, this is what we've done. And then a week later, that lady then said, actually, I was really worried, but I'm not anymore because I've seen how it works. Mm-hmm. So I think, some people have sat at home and gone nowhere, and they've done online deliveries for their supermarket shopping. They haven't seen anyone. So to take them out of that environment and drop them back into work is a big thing. And I think it's about working with them and supporting them to do that.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. We're going to set up, just from what we're going to do, we're going to set up morning meetings with the staff that are working, just to discuss how did yesterday go? Have you been to another store and seen anything that would improve our business? Because I've not done this before, as no one else has. So let's learn from what our own experiences once we start interacting with other retailers is, and we can maybe adapt things that we've done just to suit the next few weeks, however long this may go on for, months, years it may go on for.
Just a question that's coming in. I'm conscious that a number of questions have come in, but I'm going to, if there's an opportunity to put them into the conversation, I will do so, and then we'll deal with the other ones, at a later point in time. Kat Metcalf has asked, if store managers are furloughed, can they assist with risk assessments and plans to reopen without unfurloughing themselves? Holding discussions, and the question just disappeared, but I've got the nutshell of the question. So I think Alice moved it for me and put it in the answered section. Holding discussions with their own staff to go through pains and concerns. So can that be done by somebody in a management position whilst furloughed, Nicky? It's probably pushing it a bit, isn't it?
Yeah, technically no. It is no work. That's the rule on furlough at the moment. Obviously until we get to July when flexible furlough comes into play. But at the moment, no. They're doing any work, they can't be furloughed. So if you are having, if you ring them up and say, we're planning to reopen, need to talk to you about what we're doing to get you back to work, that's one thing. Yeah. Then saying to them, go away and talk to other people, then absolutely no, because they're then doing work in their management position.
Yeah.
So there are some exemptions as to, they can attend training, they can complete training online, but they can't be the person delivering the training or the person leading those management discussions, because that would be deemed work.
But you can contact a furloughed employee to talk them through coming back to work, can't you? You can talk them through the things that would be in place. So it's right and proper to contact people in prep for those things. Simon's waving a hand at me.
Well, just because I was going to say the option on that, and we've already explored this with our management teams, and we've got some of our finance team back at the moment. There's not a minimum period. Nicky will correct me if I'm wrong on this, I'm sure, but there's not a minimum period that you have to unfurlough people and have them back. So if you need to complete a risk assessment, you can unfurlough that manager for 1 day and then refurlough them as long as it's before the 10th of June, because that's the last date that you can get the 3 weeks on which they have to be back onto furlough again. So if you're going to do that, Nicky?
Yeah, so absolutely. So there's no minimum period to unfurlough someone for. So you could, absolutely. As long as they've done 3 weeks on furlough, unfurlough them for a day, do what they need to do, and then refurlough them. And the 10th of June date is for the first time to furlough someone.
Okay.
So it's irrelevant. So if someone had been furloughed until now and you thought we need them in for June, and then 29th of June, we're going to refurlough them, that's fine because they've already done their 3 week period of furlough leave. So the 10th of June is if you had anyone in music retail, you're probably unlikely to have. If you had anyone who hasn't been furloughed and you want to be able to use the flexible furlough scheme from the 1st of July, 10th of June is the latest date to put someone on furlough for the first time.
Yeah, thanks, Nicky.
Okay, I hope that answers your question. But yeah, thank you very much for that. I think at some point we're going to have to get onto the whole topic of demonstration, because a lot of the questions have come in about things to do with demonstration of product, because obviously at that point in time we're putting things into consumers' hands, and then there's a moment where they either have to be cleaned or they have to be quarantined. Jamie, what are your plans around demonstration?
So we're opening the store up, like I said previously, so people can walk around the store, but then book an appointment to try out the stock in advance. Hopefully, I know that Simon's doing something similar, so that people can in advance book an appointment to try out a piece of stock. Once they've tried out that piece of stock, depending on what it is how we deal with the product afterwards. We've made some simple appointment cards and demonstration cards to put onto the stock to notify other customers if it's being used. So almost quarantining the stock for 3 days if we have to. You know, if a card gets put it on the Tuesday, we know that by the Friday we should be able to take the ticket off and demonstrate that product again. Hopefully, in the meantime, we would get round to cleaning it and making it ready for somebody else to demonstrate. How we clean things is another matter entirely. Obviously, high-end guitars, we know that we can't use alcohol-based sprays on that to clean, so we are looking at UV lamps to put guitars through. With pianos, the digital pianos in particular, we do feel confident that we can spray them down and clean them to put them back for sale.
Ian, just on that topic, is there any guidance or anything retailers have to be careful of when they're effectively saying, I've cleaned it and I am now making it available to be used again? Is there any hoops they have to jump through, or is it just reasonable care?
It is just about the reasonable care, and actually thinking about it through. When I was listening to it, is the fact that if you've got a regime in place where you know that the customer has got hand sanitizer, so this is more about contact areas. So if you're insisting that before they use any equipment, they use hand sanitizer, that is a barrier. So for hygiene reasons. So potentially, like say, although you may need to clean the equipment, it may not be the fact that it could be just the fingerprints, because the fact that you're actually insisting that they are, hand sanitizing before they come into the store, and then potentially each piece of equipment they do use a hand sanitizer. That's one way of potentially looking at it, is the fact that if you're controlling the hygiene on arrival in your stores, and that you know that the customers have used hand sanitizer, that is going to minimize any sort of contamination of the equipment that you're using. So that's one thought process. I will need to look into it a bit more, because the retail side of it that we've currently seen it's predominantly been about social distance. So the stores that are open, and like supermarkets that are open, the key thing is what they're asking for is that people do follow those hygiene rules, but then only touch the products that they're actually going to buy. But it's going to be different in your sort of environment, is the fact that they want to pick up things and test them. But I think, like say, the way that if you think about it, is if you're controlling the hygiene on entry, then that is going to minimise any sort of further contact, and that's for all customers. So if you have that insistence of, when they arrive, they must use hand sanitizer, then you know that's a barrier that they're putting in place.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I was going to ask you about that, because clearly I don't know what everybody else's experience has been like, but every time I go to a supermarket, people are touching things and putting them back.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know whether there's any work being done on whether light touch transmission is how dangerous it actually is. But I mean, looking at every experience I have in a supermarket, theoretically everybody should have it by now, because the number of things being touched and being put back is really, really high.
It's more the harder the surface, what the sort of research that's come out that I read the other week is, the harder the surface, the more likely it's going to be on there for longer. So that's, like the plastics, it's not really going to last much on plastics, but it's more the actual harder sort of surfaces. But that's, again, if you're controlling the hand sanitizing or the hand washing when people come in, it means then if someone is touching it, then there's less likelihood of actually passing anything on.
Yeah, and I guess from your point, Jamie, if you're indicating on an instrument that it is being demonstrated and it is currently not available until it's been cleaned, then in terms of reasonable risk, that is that's a reasonable thing to put in place to sort of be making that point. I guess if somebody then strolls over to a guitar that's clearly been marked that it's been used and still decides to pick it up and strum away on it, it's not going to absolve you, but ultimately, you have done what you. I mean, it's that word reasonable again, isn't it?
Yeah. I think also for the staff's point of view as well, if you've got staff here, we're bringing back a skeleton crew to open up. They can't spend all day long just cleaning guitars. So stuff that's been demonstrated throughout the day, if we can isolate it or put cards on, and then maybe the last half hour of the day, they can go around, right, let's get that one cleaned, and then focus on those products. So again, like we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, it's managing the stock to a reasonable level, as well as making it safe for the customers and the staff that are working.
And I'm assuming so far nobody's taken Donald's approach and decided to inject their customers with bleach as they walk through the door. Okay, please we're avoiding that one. I don't think that one ends well. Simon, what are your plans with regard to demonstration?
There's a couple of trickier areas, woodwind instruments, which I think we've got some specific questions about that,
Yes.
possibly later on. With regard to woodwind instruments, we're simply not going to allow demonstrations initially. I know there's some other businesses that are very much wind focused, and that's going to be a more challenging area to have a look at, but we're more piano centric. So our plan is to have the booking system, to set the customers up in advance, clearly with the expectation on what's going to be required from them, saying to them that if they've had any symptoms in their household in the previous 14 days, then not to attend the store. When they arrive in the store, they will be the only people in that area. That we're saying to minimise the number of people that they come into the store with. The instruments will be clean, so we're planning, Jamie touched on something there about hours in the day. We've already shortened the number of hours which we're taking phone calls. We're going to do the same when we reopen as well. So we're going to open the store for our teams earlier. We're going to clean down the store. We would normally do that for all of the piano department and most of the rest of the store anyway. So we're going to clean through the whole department in advance. We're going to offer gloves for the customers if they want to wear gloves. We're going to have gloves for the team when they're demonstrating the instruments, so they'll be wearing gloves to demonstrate the pianos. And once the customers have gone, then we're leaving time. And most booking systems, you can find these online. There's lots of companies that offer booking systems you can set up very, very easily. And you can actually leave time in between bookings. And we're leaving that time to go back through and clean those instruments. For us, it's mostly pianos that we're concerned by at this particular moment. I know there's some questions that have been asked about string instruments, and I think Ian's point about ensuring that customers coming into the store, the barrier is there, and that barrier being the hand hygiene. I think somebody's mentioned the point about customers breathing on instruments as well. They are going to breathe on instruments. I think we're going to make a reasonable effort to clean down the instruments after, depending on what instrument it is, with an appropriate solution. I think we've got a slightly different scenario on the repairs side and our service side of our business. So when repairs come into the business, they're going to be segregated for a period of time. With regard to our service teams and technicians who are on the road, again, we've got an email that goes to the customers in advance that asks them if anyone in the household has had symptoms to reorganise their tunings when they're in their household. And one of the biggest things with regards to the government advice on this is, I believe, if you're indoors in a limited space, then social distancing needs to go slightly further than that with regard to face masks as well. So we're offering our teams face masks that they can wear when they're in the customers' homes and asking the customer not to be in the same room. We're disinfecting the tools in advance, and then we're going to disinfect them again when we leave the household. And again, we're extending the amount of time the technicians have to complete the tunings in order to achieve that.
I think you actually touched on something really interesting there, which is to the whole, because I'd seen the comment about breathing on instruments. I mean, face masks would, to a certain extent, alleviate that. And I'm assuming it's perfectly okay for you to insist that a customer wears a face mask if you decide that's what you want to do in your environment. I mean, you might offend one or two, but I think if you explain it properly and the reasons why, and I'd be interested in Ian's take on that. But certainly, obviously, we've just now insisted, that if you're going to use public transport I don't quite understand why it's in the future, but that you have to wear a face mask. So there is guidance now suggesting that in certain scenarios, face masks are not only appropriate but necessary. Ian, is it something you can insist people wear?
I think if it's part of what you're going to install as part of your protection for your employees and your customers, it's a reasonable requirement to do that.
Right.
The thing around face masks, and it's always been the case from early on, and I know things have sort of changed, and I think it's medical advice that they're actually asking for face masks to be worn. Face masks they're not a protection for yourself. It's a protection in the wider world. It's protection from for other people rather than yourself. So it's not like wearing a Superman cape. The scenarios where it's insisting that you do wear masks is in frontline areas. The guidance that came out on the 11th of May was in regards to face coverings. Right. So when you're commuting, say for example, and they use the London Underground as a prime example, is you can't social distance those 2 meters.
Yes.
So basically they were suggesting that you can wear face coverings. and they even actually put a link in for like a Blue Peter style thing that you can actually make your own. So it was a good idea, because what we don't want to do is with face masks is taking PPE away from the NHS and that type of thing. So that's why you will see, like, a lot of the masks that you'll see people wearing, they are either homemade or they've actually, you know, bought a different type of mask that's not actually a medical face mask.
Yeah, and I think that's a really fair point. I guess the point there, and to answer the specific question that was asked, which is, you know, I absolutely appreciate that it's about transmission, and so therefore it's a protection for somebody else rather than protection for you. But the purpose of the question being asked, and which is to obviously stop people breathing on hard surfaces and transmission onto hard surfaces, then that would be the reason for asking somebody to, you know, to do that. I guess it's down to whether, like you say, whether you can secure supply of what you would need and it not be something that would normally be needed by frontline workers. So if and I'm sure there will be, I'm sure by next week it'll be like fidget spinners. You'll be able to get masks, you know, face coverings everywhere.
Every clothing manufacturer, and I can say to you from the outdoor side, we've ordered hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them to sell. Every clothing manufacturer is producing these now. On the outdoor side, I think you'll find that almost every retailer will have some form of face mask or covering. Yeah.
So you know, maybe to ask the question that came in about breathing on instruments, you know, maybe you make that decision in your own environment, and I think that'll come down to the number of people you're expecting, exactly what the mix of instruments is, the size of your building, you know, and you might choose to make those decisions. And going back to that point, reasonable again, if you feel that is reasonable in the environment that you have. So one quick follow-on question from Kat Metcalf about furlough was, if you unfurloughed somebody, her understanding was you then had to furlough them again for a minimum of 3 weeks. That's correct? Does that change when it becomes flexible?
Initially. So the guidelines out on flexible furlough are coming out on the 12th of June.
Right.
So next Friday. So until they fully come out, we don't know exactly what the rules are going to be.
Yeah.
But yes, on the old scheme, you know, to claim, you need to, it's claiming in periods of 3 weeks. So yes. Potentially, yes, from that point of view. Right. If you've called someone back, you might need to refurlough them by the 10th of June, but we won't know until the 12th, so that's going to be really helpful.
So in answer to the question earlier on, if you are going to want to take someone off furlough to do something specific, make sure you know exactly what you want to do with them. Make sure you've got enough time to do it, because when you refurlough them, then it is 3 weeks.
Yeah,
and we
absolutely. So, but there's nothing to stop where you said about, you know, obviously you can open from the 15th, but you don't have to.
Yeah.
The same with the flexible furlough scheme, is you don't have to use that from the 1st of June. So if you furloughed someone from the 1st of July, if you furloughed someone on the 29th of June, they could be fully furloughed for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And then switch to the flexible scheme.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's nothing that says from the 1st of July everyone's got to do flexible furlough. It's just a really good option that is there for people going forward.
Yeah.
So that's why it's something to start thinking about as well. And also one thing to think about with your staff that we haven't mentioned is about whether you get them to work in bubbles. So I know they talked about that quite a lot. So having specific teams that work together, so that if anyone does have to isolate or anyone does get COVID, that you've only got a limited amount of people that may need to be isolated and taken out of the business rather than your whole team. And especially for things that can't do social distancing. So if you're unloading deliveries of pianos, for example, that isn't a one-person job. So people might have to be closer. So then gloves, face masks, and also keeping that limited. So it isn't, again, you're not mixing stuff unnecessarily to mean if someone does have to isolate, that it's less people rather than more.
Okay.
I would just add documentation as well on that, and I'm sure Nicky will confirm on this, but if you're unfurloughing people as we have and then planning to refurlough them, just making sure that you've documented that you've issued some sort of email or communication to them and saying this is the expectation, which is what we've done, document on those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything furlough related has to be confirmed in writing. So we have had many versions of the furlough agreement as government's changed the guidelines at the beginning, and I'm sure I'm going to have to update that next weekend. But at the moment, yeah, everything in writing. So they go on furlough, it's confirmed in writing. They come back, you confirm it in writing. You're refurloughing them again, that needs to be confirmed in writing. And if you're using the flexible furlough scheme, that will also need to be confirmed in writing, although we don't know exactly what the expectations are for that yet.
Okay, thanks, Nicky. Just to take a question that Clifford Williams put forward, which was just saying that they're going to limiting people coming in and they're going to insist everyone sanitize their hands. If they've done so, how much emphasis would you put on cleaning instruments afterwards? I think we've kind of covered that with what you said, Ian. The one thing I've taken from what Jamie's going to do is, I think, identifying instruments that have been demonstrated, have been used, have been in people's hands is a really good, easy way of not only making sure and you don't forget, but also of highlighting that to customers as well and putting an extra sort of barrier there. But it's a valid point that Clifford makes, and obviously it's the same point that Ian made, which is, you know, the barrier to a certain extent is the sanitizer. So that will help. So I think hopefully we answered that question for you, Clifford. Obviously we've touched on demonstration of instruments. The big one really is when people talk about instruments that come into direct contact with the mouth. Is this a point to, and it's an open question to the retailers really, are we at a point, because of what we do and don't know and the information we have, where we're just having to say, look, products like that, because of the much higher risk involved or the potential high risk involved, just aren't available for demonstration at the moment? What are your plans? I suppose Simon first, actually.
That's exactly what we're planning to do initially. And I think that, look, everyone has had to deal with this and the pace at which it moved and the way that sentiment moved so quickly. I think our plan initially, and I know that doesn't help some of the retailers out there who are focused on this area of the market, but our plan is initially to say that that instrument is not available for demonstration. What we are planning to do is get a whole series of videos recorded, improve the product descriptions on our website, improve the descriptions in store, so that we're able, and I think that's a general point, we've assessed our overall sales process and we were very, very store centric, as many music stores are, because customers come in and want to try the instruments. We've actually looked at our entire sales process and said, how do we begin that process earlier? How do we qualify? How do we understand the customer's requirements? And a lot of what we're talking about, and Ian, I'm sure will say as well, on health and safety, it's about minimising risk, minimising contact. Nicky's mentioned about bubbles. Well, exactly that. I think that we're working through those processes earlier. If a customer's in the store and wants to hear what a particular instrument sounds like, then yes, we can offer you videos. That does not help the retailers out there. And I totally understand. We're more focused on the student and progressing players, not the professional players who are going to want to come in and try 3 Selmas and 4 Yanagisawas. And I think that our approach at this stage is to limit contact with that. But I think there are some plans, and as far as the MIA is concerned, in terms of advice and cleaning on that, and I think that that's going to come through.
Yeah, we've been working with a number of manufacturers to ask them about cleaning and hygiene of different styles of instruments. So we've been working with Dennis Wick, and we've been working with Warwick Music, working with PRS Guitars. So we're in the process of starting to publish a lot of content about best practice for cleaning of instruments, and that will continue to flow through. So we've asked a lot of manufacturers to supply as much information as possible, and I guess it's going to be a case of watching the MIA newsletter and website over the course of the next sort of week or so as we assemble and we publish that advice. I mean, part of the problem here is that people are saying, well, can you just tell us what the best cleaning solution is? And of course, the problem is there isn't a single answer to any of this. And whereby a particular manufacturer of piano might tell you what's okay for their piano, it might not be something that then is recommended by an alternative piano manufacturer. So we're even down to brand and even model issues here with what is the best and what appropriate to use. So we'll provide as much information as we can. It may be for those stores that have relationships, with your suppliers and your distributors, you may have to ask, them for the final nod on, is something okay, okay to be used. But obviously there's a huge plethora of information, out there, and we'll try and bring as much of it to you as we possibly can. I think my point on woodwind and brass instruments is just because it's the mouth and because of the interaction with the instrument. It's that whole thing of is that an area where at the moment, you know, maybe there just is a little bit too much risk?
Can you make people feel safe and secure? And as what I'd say, everyone's, can you make your customers feel safe and secure doing that? Our customer asked yesterday, can I come and try trumpet mouthpieces? Is there a safe way that we can do that? Can we articulate it to them? Do we think it's safe for us? Do we think it's safe for them to do? If you do, and you've developed that, I mean, I would encourage everyone to follow the MIA updates. If you've got information to share as an industry, we need to figure out ways to overcome this. The government is not going to give advice on that. We need to figure out ways to do that as an industry, and I would encourage anybody in the industry who's come up with these systems or ideas or things to share them. I'm sure Alice and Paul would welcome the input.
Ian, is there anything specific that you can add about that, or is it just literally a case of, you know, each particular retail sector just having to share as much information as possible about the specifics of their sector?
I think it is that, unfortunately. Like say, we base a lot of our information on the teams that we use as backup and following the guidance. And like Simon's quite rightly said, is that some specific industries are fighting their own corner. So it was things like, you know, the last couple of weeks with like hairdressers, and I know with dentistry is another area. So they're quite specific in their particular roles, and they're actually as a collective body. They're actually coming up with their own guidelines and of what things to do. So yeah, it is a case of collectively trying to find the best way of doing it. And like the things that you said about, you know, contacting the manufacturers and getting some recommendations from them. But again, like you said before, it's like almost like when you buy a washing machine or a dishwasher, they will recommend a particular product for the use. So it could be coming down to that, is that's the way it's going to go. But I think it is just having that channel of communication, that if people find a good way of doing it, it comes back to the face coverings. That came out quite early on with the actual infection, and so we've seen a lot of those cloth masks being worn fairly early on because people didn't want to use the NHS ones. But yeah, I think collectively that's the way that you need to go forward.
And probably, and we'll certainly do as much as we can to get as much information to everybody. But also, the more retail stores that contact manufacturers and ask for advice and support in this, you know, it's in the interest of the manufacturers and the distributors and the suppliers to have their products be demonstrated and ultimately purchased. So that, you know, it is not unreasonable to ask for support here. To say, well, look, you're going to have to help me with the information on how I can use, you know, how I can clean the product. What would you suggest in terms of demonstration? And can you supply some of those tools for me? Because ultimately, you know, I would imagine the manufacturers that help out the most are probably the ones that will probably see that in follow-on sales. So certainly, I don't think it's unreasonable to talk to your supply points and ask those questions. Nicky, a question. Sorry, Ian, carry on.
The key thing is that it's airborne. It's from the mouth that's the key transmission. Yes. So that's the thing that you've got to bear in mind. That, you know, how can we control that? And some people won't develop the symptoms, you know, up to 7 days after contracting them. So it's how we manage that until we get you know, a vaccine.
Yeah, and I think we're back to that point of what is a reasonable risk. And if you determine for your business that a reasonable risk is not letting people use instruments that come into contact with the mouth, then that's your reasonable risk and that's your assessment. You know, and certainly that to me would seem fair. Nicky, question that's coming from Pam at Moseley Violins. If an employee is contacted by Track and Trace, are they obliged to let their employer know? What should we do if staff tell us they have been alerted because they've been in contact with someone who has tested positive?
Okay, so, well, yes, obviously they should let you know, because either they've got to self-isolate, so they need to let you know that they can't come to work, or unless they're on furlough still, or they need to let you know because maybe they've been in contact with someone else. So there's kind of, from that point of view, yes, they absolutely do need to let you know. And then they've changed the rules around sick pay so that would cover under that side of things now. You're being told to medically isolate, so that's covered under statutory sick pay. But yeah, that's something that I can, as that gets up and running effectively, then yeah, that is something that is quite possibly going to happen. They should have some evidence, but some of it is then, well, they're going to be contacted by phone call. You can't show your employer a phone call. So I think if people are getting told to isolate, it's asking, okay, what have you got that I can show my employer? Because yeah, quite reasonably, most employees are going to be really honest, and you'll know that they're telling you the truth. And others, you know, you need a consistent process in there to check to make sure that people are genuinely isolating because they've been told to. And you're going to come up with a situation where some employees may never be told to isolate because they've been complying with social distancing and taking all the measures that they should do, and others who could be isolating back and then needing to re-isolate because they're not complying with the measures. So that's just something that I think, yeah, we're going to have to live with at the moment, and monitor and see whether at some stage that's something that may need to be dealt with.
And I guess the guidelines on that are going to be fluid as we start to actually see examples of people being asked to self-isolate, because there isn't really enough data at the moment, I guess, to know if we've got the advice right or wrong.
No, absolutely. And it's this whole thing is a moving beast, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's things are constantly changing, advice is constantly changing. We've all got used to this 2 metre thing, but then there is talk about whether maybe it could be 1 metre. Yeah, we've got yesterday, it's something like you've got to use face masks on public transport when you didn't before. So employers more than ever have got to keep up to date with these things to know exactly what it is that should and shouldn't be happening.
Okay, while I've got you, Paul Harris has asked, what are the panel's views around an employer's liability if a staff member or customer disregard the advice or best practice that's been put in place?
That's a good question. So from an employee point of view, if, and that comes back to some view we're talking about preparation, is training your staff as to what your measures are that you've got in place and making them aware of the consequences of breaching those. And as long as you make them aware, okay, you know, if you breach social distancing once, we're going to tell you off. If you continually do it, we might go down the disciplinary route. If we said we're not demonstrating any woodwind instruments and you knowingly go and do that, that's gross misconduct, because at the moment, we've just talked about that massive health and safety risk. So absolutely, it's making your rules around that really clear. So it isn't just, yeah, come back to work, comply with social distancing and hand washing, but these are our rules. And if you breach these, there are repercussions. From a customer point of view, obviously Jamie and Simon probably know a little bit more, but I would be saying if customers are breaching it, you can ask them to leave your store.
Well, I was just about to go to Ian and ask him the customer one, but then ask it to Jamie and Simon as well, because obviously there's the absolute advice of what you can do, and then there's the practical what you can do in the real world. So I guess, Ian, the absolute advice is that you just ask somebody to leave your store, I guess. Yeah,
although as retailers, your doors are open and people can come in and go out, it's private property. And as store owners, you have the absolute, if you don't want to serve anyone, you can ask them to leave. And that's what, you know, I used to do quite a lot in my days when I didn't want certain people in the store that I knew were, you know, either going to cause trouble or they were intoxicated or, you know, whatever. So they're the type of things. The other thing, just to back up with what Nicky was saying, is if employees are not making the employer compliant, then that's one of the areas that you go through. And like I say, it's, you know, gross misconduct. It's it's following that up as well. So you know, if you've actually stipulated in a risk assessment a process, and you've got that down and they've written and they understand it and they've gone against it, they're not, as employees, are not making the employer compliant. So that's another area that you can pursue as well.
And it would probably fall in already written procedures where serious breach of health and safety is gross misconduct anyway. Right. So, you know, it's making them really aware of those consequences. And Paul just said getting staff to sign that they've been trained and understood the procedures. And yeah, absolutely, that's vital. You've got that signature to sign. I've signed, read, understood, and know it's my responsibility to comply. Then they can't turn around and say, I didn't realise. Yeah. Well,
that certainly covered the staff. Jamie, Simon, have you plans in place to to ask customers to leave who might not be respecting?
I haven't really thought about it yet. I must admit, it's something I haven't given that much thought to. What do we do if someone starts breaking that? We're hoping that people are respectful. But yeah, I think what Nicky and Ian have said is something definitely to take on board. And if someone is breaching it, then just ask them to leave the store.
Because it's interesting, because if that was the case, Sainsbury's should be rejecting every third person around the fruit and veg aisle, if I'm being honest. But I
was just thinking that with supermarkets, absolutely.
I chunter all the way around the supermarket at people who are getting within that space. It's ridiculous. But that prompts the fact it's a very serious question, that we have got totally different individuals have got a totally different take on what 2 meters is. I mean, if you stand outside a supermarket, 2 meters is actually the equivalent of 20 feet because everybody stands that far apart. And you go inside and 2 meters is about the length of a banana.
Yeah, and I think we're talking what customers as well. It's the way that you need to have signage that is, if you touch instruments,
yes,
and you haven't had permission to, and if you breach social distancing with other customers' products and staff, that you will be asked to leave the premises. You've got that displayed really clearly. Then there's no argument over them saying, "Oh, I didn't realise that wasn't allowed." We all know people go, people like to touch things, don't they? So I think the difficulty of stopping people touching things in the store, is a challenge. But I think, again, it's making it very clear to people, these are our rules and these are the consequences.
And of course, this is something you can deal with at the point of entry. Those are the conversations you can have with people before they actually cross the threshold. Somebody said to me yesterday, I think it was Paul, I said yesterday, maybe it's the time to have your best employee actually on the door, that actually that is probably the point where you can do most in terms of the whole experience, because that might be the key point. And certainly in explaining and heading off a situation where you might have to eject somebody, explain it well before they come in might be the way to do it. Simon, have you got any opinion on that one?
Well, yeah, exactly that. I think setting the expectation, making sure that the website, we're still working on at the moment. Our website is going to evolve quite a lot over the next couple of weeks in terms of what we've got planned to set the expectations for customers in the environment, making sure the emails, making sure the store signage, they're all simple things, but they all need to be done. I've got a friend who's actually visited some building sites, and the disparity between what's being offered on some sites was like, sorry, we ran out of soap, and other building sites where you arrive, you're issued with gloves and with face masks, and then you're issued with another face mask when you leave to go home with, and another one for the morning. And I think it depends on the particular circumstance. One thing that I was going to add, and it's something that's not directly related, but hopefully follows on from what Nicky said, we're talking about paperwork there. One of the things that we've made a particular effort to undertake in the last few weeks is to remove and reduce the amount of paperwork that we're actually pushing around in the business. So our finance system allowed us to upload invoices. We don't touch invoices physically anymore. In some places, metaphorically, they come straight in and straight into our finance systems. We've actually implemented an all-new HR system in the last few weeks, digitized all of our files, but it has an e-signing process on it. So when we're issuing processes out to team members, and something to particularly think about where you've got remote workers or you've got people that are furloughed, training them, but also documenting and signing that. So we're moving away from paper wherever we can. Same with contracts with customers as well, where we've implemented DocuSign processes. So it's not directly related, but it follows on from what Nicky said about preparing the businesses and ensuring that it's documented in terms of the training that's been issued. We're actually looking at ways that we can go paperless. And I know there's historically systems would have been expensive. We had a system up and running within half an hour. We had a 14-day trial. Software is so easily available to do this nowadays, and it's an operating expense rather than a capital expense. These are very easy things that can be achieved with very little upfront cost. And we've actually found that it's massive. I mean, for all of the tragedy that surrounds COVID, and it is obviously an awful disease, there are things that have been prompted in our business. I'm trying to pull out the positives out of this, and there's changes that we've made now that we probably wouldn't have made had this not have happened. Yeah. And it's finding those opportunities, and whether it's improvements to our sales process, improvements to our HR systems, improvements to the customer process. We're now offering rental online with digital signing processes. So there's all sorts of things that are coming out of this as well. And you know, those are things that have been positives. And it's very easy to talk about all the negatives, but there's actually improvements that businesses across the country are making for the customer experience. And I think it's the same with our business. We're trying to find those as well.
No, absolutely. And I think you're right in electronic signatures for staff documentation and moving to those sort of things. Yeah, there's DocuSign, there's Adobe, a HR system that I'm partnered with where you can upload documents and staff click to say, yes, I've read it and I'll comply with it.
Yeah.
So and that's really good from having an actual date and time that this happened. So there's really good ways electronically of doing these things. So it doesn't have to be, here's a bit of paper and a pen, sign this. And actually, should you even be sharing a pen? There's a whole million load of things around that as well. So it's about, yes, there's very good ways of doing these things, but documentation and records to show that you've trained staff and you've explained the risk assessments, their obligations and those things, however you do it, yes, but absolutely, if you can do it and record it electronically at the moment, that's a much better way to go.
I think to Simon's point, I guess the first thing we try and do in any situation is try and find a way of replicating what we did before in a way that is appropriate. The next stage from that is actually to throw away the way you used to do it before and actually see if there's a different way of doing it. And I think we're starting to arrive now at different ways of doing things, because actually trying to find a way of what we replicating what we had before is too challenging. But what we did before was habitual anyway. So isn't this a time to then start to think if there are alternative ways? I mean, I spoke to somebody yesterday about whether you could do consultations over Zoom. The one thing that an online business can't do is have somebody in a store surrounded with equipment and take somebody through 2 or 3 alternatives over a Zoom call or over a virtual call. That's something that an Amazon or what have you can't do, but it's something that a store can do. So maybe we just readjust it a little bit and go, well, actually, some of these things can be done remotely. So let's do what we can remotely and try and get rid of those sort of interactions in store as an alternative to trying to find a way of making an interaction work that there might not be a solution for. Sorry, Sam.
I was going to say exactly that. We found systems. It's so easily done nowadays. We've got a system, booking system that, again, we implemented in half an hour. We had a system up online. It was fully functional. Yes, there was a bit of configuration, but it was so simple to do. So we've built in a virtual demonstration process, exactly as you said there, Anne, and looked at what we can provide uniquely. We're also now looking at the after sales process and what we can offer as an additional service for customers to add more value back in, to say, you've bought a piano. Actually, would you like a 15-minute taster session from one of our team where they go through this instrument with you? And again, with the connectivity of systems and how you're working on, and this is something we're looking at in terms of training our teams who've not historically had to maintain calendars in those ways. But we're looking at that. It genuinely is something that without much technical knowledge is not particularly difficult to implement. So we're looking at ways, we've looked at our entire sales process and completely reshaped it so that the initial contact comes in online. The demonstration is one part of it, but how do you enhance both of those, potentially with a pre-demonstration qualification process and then a post-sales, after-sales, which actually adds value for the customer. So there are ways of finding opportunities and differentiating in this. And I've said it, I wrote an article for an outdoor magazine. I mentioned it, I think, on the last call. It was an absolute roller coaster, it still is. The emotions of going through this, the moral dilemmas, and as a business owner, I'll tell you quite candidly, I thought this was the end of our entire group when we were shutting down our businesses at the start of the lockdown. There was the kind of panic, the coping. You come through it, and we have started to find, and we've challenged our teams to find new ways to interact with customers. And we're finding that customers are more understanding. We're getting customers thanking us for answering the phone. Well, there are things as a retail store that you can do that you maybe won't get in online businesses. I'm not saying online businesses in our industry, but in other online businesses, if anyone's ever tried to phone Amazon, and there are things that we can do, and we need to find those opportunities, and technology is available to do that.
Yeah, right. I'm going to, because we kind of, we as we always do, we put these things in for roughly an hour, and then we start getting excited about 5 to the hour, and then go a bit bonkers. So I'm going to try and rattle through the 5 remaining questions that we have, and then try and tie it up, relatively promptly, because all of them are fairly similar actually, and most of them are coming your direction, Ian. So I've kind of been padding a little bit, waiting for you to come back. No, it's fine. If you thought you were getting away with it, there wasn't hope.
No. I just had a sneezing fit, and I thought I can't do it on camera.
No, not with the topic. No, probably not. One person's asked, an anonymous attendee, maybe the same person, maybe 2 different people. We have 2 questions. What's the view on taking temperatures? Now, I don't know if that refers to staff or if that refers to customers. Obviously, you can do it touch-free. So what's the official guidance?
There's no current guidance on taking temperatures. The ownership, it comes down to the individual employee. The guidance is, and this comes back to, so as an employee, they've got a responsibility for themselves, duty of care for others as well. But the guidance is that if you've got a constant cough, you've lost your sense of taste, and you think that you've got a high temperature, so it's an individual thing. You should know yourself, if you're not feeling too well, that they make that call. They don't go into work and they contact your employer to sort of say, I think I've got some symptoms and I'm going to investigate, and I'll find out. And it may be now we have the opportunity that potentially they can book themselves for a test.
Yeah.
With customers, it's about, like you say, that guidance on points of entry, is that if you specifically have a sign on there that says, if you have had in the last 24 hours a constant cough, loss of taste and a temperature, then can you book an online appointment, or can you come back in 7 days' time? It's just managing that expectation at that point when you're coming into the store. And then again, if someone comes in and they are coughing and spluttering everywhere, and then again, it's that thing about managing, and sort of saying, can you please leave? And it's those type of things that you've got to make that request.
So you send 3 or 4 staff out in hazmat suits and bundle them out of the building in some kind.
Yeah, you can do that as well. That might be,
it'd make
full apparatus, breathing apparatus on there as well. So
it'd make for good YouTube clips.
We've ordered, we were offered some thermal thermometers, because I think not everyone necessarily has. We found with some of the younger team members who are maybe living, in student accommodation places, they haven't got thermometers in the home. There's thermal cameras available, and they're not too expensive to buy. And there are those things that are available for team members as well. So we have looked at that and other health and safety precautions as well. I think off the top of my head, about £60–65, which is not an inconsequential cost, but if it's part of your overall health and safety routine, they are available, and we can possibly share that after Ant as well.
I guess the other thing I was going to say on that was around checking if they've travelled from it, when they arrive in the UK, especially with these quarantine rules coming into play as well. So again, keeping up to date with the guidelines of, have you got a cough, temperature, loss of taste or smell? Have you come from one of these countries? If so, you're not allowed in our store. And the same, we're checking that with staff when they first come back, because you need to make sure that you're covering all bases on that front.
Yeah. And I guess if you chat amongst your team, and your team are all happy to have the temperature taken as they come in, and they all feel reassured by that process, then maybe that's the route you look at it for your team, just as another reassurance, which, to your point earlier on, Nicky, is about people being comfortable in the workplace. And, it certainly wouldn't bother me if that was something to be done and might help.
No, I've got a client that does manufacturing. They do quite a lot of aerospace manufacturing. So obviously they've been carrying on, and their policy is that they take everyone's temperature every day. And people aren't objecting, because, what have you got to lose by knowing that no one at work has got one of the symptoms?
Cool. Julia Morley has asked, I've been told we need to keep a log of who enters our building. Do you recommend this? Firstly, Ian, is that something you have to do, or is that just...
I think, is this coming down to the track and trace sort of element?
I don't know. She's not mentioned that. That was just the question that came in. I've been told we need to keep a log of who enters our building. Do you recommend it?
Well, like so, the only thing I know about the track and trace is that where you can identify somebody where you've haven't been able to social distance for 10 to 15 minutes, that's when you're going to get contacted in regards to track and trace.
Yeah.
People who are just say pass you in the corridor, or they're just visiting for short periods of time, it's entirely up to the business decisions whether they do that or not. But
I would also add a GDPR angle to that as well. If you're collecting personal data, why, what for? Yeah. Certainly supermarkets aren't keeping a log of who's been in. So.
Yeah. I think if it's an office environment and it's good practice to be keeping a record of who's been in there from a fire safety point of view, but certainly not from a customer point of view. No.
No, I mean, you'll have records because you've got your booking system, so you will know who's been in. But I think saying, can you sign this? Can you log in somewhere so we know you've been in the building is going to be quite off-putting for customers. It's daunting enough at the moment, I think, for some people going out into the retail environment as it is.
Kat Metcalf's, who's just won the prize for the most number of questions in the day. Congratulations, Kat. Probably missed this. How are people dealing with returns? Jamie, I'm going to come to you on that one simply because I haven't spoken to you for a while. I didn't know if you actually dropped off.
Not yet. We're isolating the returns for 72 hours. So when we get stock back in, we're isolating it, and then we are checking it over from there on to then issue the refund. So anything that comes in, even part exchange as well, we've been doing the same. Part exchanges, we've been asking customers, we will be, and we have before we locked down a couple of part exchanges that we took them in, and then we isolated them for 72 hours, 3 days, and then opened them up, and then worked it out from there. And that's what we're doing with returns. Obviously, from a store point of view, I think the one thing that people not need to be relaxed on, but if your store's been closed, it's been closed for 12 weeks now. When you walk in there, it should be a neutral, clean environment naturally. So I think that from our point of view, when we reopen, we know the staff that's been in the store, and we know that everything in here is safe at the moment. It's that public coming in that we need to be cautious about.
Same as well, and with rental instruments, I know it'll apply to some of the traditional retailers out there. We've just implemented a policy when the rental instrument comes back, then it's because we've got hundreds of inquiries for rental instruments. It's quite incredible, actually. But we're isolating the instruments for a few days before we work on them. Exactly the same thing.
And two more questions to go. And I'm going to leave Bill from Thwaites' question to last because I think it was the first one that came in. Sorry, Bill, but I'll go to this one because I think it's quicker first. Does anybody know if fans to clean air in shops are useful? That's going to come straight your way, Ian, I think.
There's two things. It's like when you do need fresh air. That's what the circulation of air is quite important. So you don't want stale air, especially when you've got customers coming in. So some form of natural ventilation is better rather than having fans and air conditioning units. If you've been closed for a long period of time as well, if you have got air conditioning, is it best to get it serviced before it's put in operation? Because there is a risk of, like say, if it's stagnant, Legionella as well. But like I say, that they're the important things. Just
don't start us on another one.
I can talk about any subject. It's all right.
Thanks for that. Thanks for putting that air of doubt into everybody's minds.
Yeah.
Right, okay. And then Bill from Thwaites, you can take it home, Bill. They're using a strictly by appointment system. Do we need to make any other changes to the shop, like newsagents, with things like perspex screens? He's also asked a question about demonstration, but I think we've covered that bit. So the whole perspex screen issue, obviously they've sprung up in lots of supermarkets and they've sprung up in lots of in other stores.
It's just another barrier. So where the social distancing can't be adhered to. So normally when you're interacting with a cashier or at customer services, it is normally within that 2 metre period. So it is another form of a barrier to prevent or protect the actual employee, not necessarily the customers. And that's the other thing. Like say, if you can encourage, most people are trying to encourage, contactless or plastic payments rather than cash. So there's those type of things as well.
I've spoken to jewellers and in other sectors, and they've got a really complicated scenario to deal with because obviously it relies on touch on putting the products onto customers, and they were saying they were going to change away from counters to seated environments so that it's all about the social distancing. You know, can you reasonably distance from a customer? And if you can't, then potentially you have to have a look at that. But we're looking at in our business and saying where it's a customer at a counter, potentially we do have a screen. Where it's desks in the piano department, we'll be able to separate, and therefore we won't require. And I think it's part of the risk assessment that we discussed earlier on.
Cool. Right, I'm going to wrap it up there because otherwise we're still going to be going, and it's Friday and it's getting very close to the time when I open a bottle of something. Thank you very much, Nicky. Thank you, Jamie. Thank you, Simon. Thank you, Ian. It's been a fantastic session. I really thank you all for your input. A couple of points just to tidy up before we go. We mentioned it, but there will be lots of information coming about individual instrument hygiene. So we work with manufacturers to get that information across. Some of it's already come across. Dennis Wicker provided some, Warwick Music have, and there's something coming from PRS, but we'll work with as many manufacturers as possible. So please keep checking the website. Please keep checking the newsletter. If you're not signed up for the newsletter, please sign up for the newsletter, because we're getting information out every day. We've already put some articles out that are talking about the experiences that customers in Europe and the US have already had, because those places are already open. So have a look at what's been put out over the last couple of days. We did some work with a company called Amro in the US, and we've had some stuff over from Europe, and a great study from the French authority, which is also worth reading. There's also some fantastic stuff on instrument cleaning on NAM's website as well. So plenty of things worth checking out. One thing we are going to do next week is we are going to start asking people on Wednesday to let us know what your plans are for reopening, because we're going to put together a map of the country and who's actually open for business and when those businesses are opening. So we're working with Future Music to get all that information out to as many end users as we possibly can, just to remind them. We did this with all the online stores that were open at the beginning of the lockdown. We're going to do it now for all the stores that are reopening. So we want to take as much information to market to tell musicians who's open in your area and what services they're offering. So keep an eye on the website and the newsletter on Wednesday, and we'll be asking you to just let us know if you are opening and when you are opening, and we will share that information as far as we possibly can. And we'll be updating that information on a daily basis, certainly for the first couple of weeks. So even if you're not opening on the 15th, but you're opening a little bit after, let us know, and that information will be live and fluid. And then finally, we'd had the idea, and I haven't sprung this on the panel yet, but that we maybe would get together in sort of 2.5, 3 weeks to do this again, to see what we've learned in the 2.5, 3 weeks since we've been open. So not that we're going to fact check everything you've said and worked out 2 weeks later that it was garbage, but it's more a case of actually saying, look, these are the things that we prepped for, but obviously at the moment we don't know. Until people start appearing at our doors, we just don't 100% know. And actually, of the things that we talked about today, 50% of it we're still doing, but we've actually changed 50% of it in light of real experiences. So if the panel could keep their diaries clear, and we're going to do something probably the last few days of June, just to get an update from everybody and see what the example, what the real world experience has been. So if you've enjoyed today and you've taken something from it, keep looking out, because there'll be another one in a couple of weeks, and we'll continue this conversation, but with the benefit of a little bit of hindsight. Other than that, if I could ask everybody to give a wave and say goodbye. I didn't honestly think you'd do that if I asked you. I can't believe all four of you did that, but thank you very much for playing. Thank you very much for your time. And to everybody who's joined, I hope you found this useful, and we will see you all again very soon.